It is not untouched by what is happening. And therefore, much of what I say about Rajasthan would also reflect my concern and perhaps my views on how we could go forward in getting our growth momentum back. So there are two ways of approaching the subject that you've given to me. One is what we have already gone through, which is what is Rajasthan offering and what Rajasthan is very good for investment and so on, which most of my colleagues in the government would come and tell you. And many of you would nod your head in skepticism and say, well, we have heard that and we have seen it. But the other way of looking at it is to share with you how I see Rajasthan as not just a potential, what are the problems that we see there? And to give you an idea that we understand there are problems and how we are going to address those problems. I think it's important for establishing credibility uh, to climb down a bit from marketing hype and start talking about the reality on the ground and how that reality can be changed. So, as a policymaker, the first and foremost issue that uh, anybody would grapple is poverty. And in terms of poverty, how we look at what we have always touted as the demographic dividend and how that demographic dividend can actually be converted into an opportunity of a one-time opportunity for the country. If we look at the unemployment status, and what I am going to share with you is the Rajasthan status, because we are talking about Rajasthan, but it is in tandem with the national status. So you would get a flavor of what is happening to unemployment and employment in the country in that sense. As per 2011 census, Rajasthan had a population of 6.86 crores, and population growth rate, which is decadal growth rate, was estimated to be 21%. So if we extrapolate that for 2021, the state's population should be around 8.32 crores. Now, in 2019, average number of unemployed in India was slightly over 25 lakhs. I'm talking of 1919, and these are CMIE figures. So I'm not giving you government figures, which nowadays many people doubt, but this is an independent and very respected database, which has given these numbers. So 2019 average number of unemployed was slightly over 25 lakhs. In 2020, it went up to 42 lakhs. And in November 2021, the number is 63 lakhs. Now, PLFS data, which is the government data, is slightly at variance, but the truth is that number of unemployed is growing. And this is in tandem with national figures, because we've seen the national figures also, the rate of unemployment is growing. And participation, labor participation rate also has been declining. So this is something which is all India phenomenon, but in Rajasthan too, we are seeing the same issue. So if we look at this, the basis of any policy vis-a-vis investment, which is vis-a-vis business or industry, has to be focused on the fact that we need private investment if we want to reverse this trend. And this is true not for Rajasthan, this is true for the country, but for Rajasthan too, it is imperative that we reverse this trend. And to reversing this trend, there are two ways of looking at it. One is specific to the industry. How do you look at those issues which impact industry? In Rajasthan, 90% of the industries are in MSME. And therefore, MSME is the backbone of industrial activity in the state. And obviously, therefore, MSMEs must be looked at very closely. And the analysis has to be sector by sector to see where the bottlenecks are and how these can be addressed. Unfortunately, when it comes to industrial activity, the leverage that the state governments have is very limited. It used to be earlier a little more when they had state sales tax, where a lot of incentives, etc., were given. But now it is all GST, and therefore, whether it is legal, whether it is taxation, or otherwise, linkages to raw material or linkages to markets, much of it is dependent on Government of India's policies. Unfortunately, we haven't seen much movement there. I will come to that later. But except for easing up the flow of credit to MSMEs, there hasn't been much movement in any other manner in which could really make it grow. For instance, if you look at textile, the manner in which we have done taxation of man-made fibers or cotton fibers, etc., this is actually counterproductive. It encourages it enhances imports of textiles into the country, whereas it inhibits the growth of textile, which is the largest producer or largest employment generator sector as far as MSMEs are concerned, and it is across the board. So it is not dependent on port facilities, etc. So you can actually create a lot of jobs across the country. As the eminent economist Rathin Roy has said, it is unfortunate that in India we are not able to produce good quality shirts for 500 rupees, whereas we can produce shirts, good quality shirts, only for 1200 rupees. And Bangladesh produces the same quality of shirts for 400 rupees and exports them. So therefore, we can see where the taxation, central taxation, is inhibiting the growth in industry, but much of it later. So presently, what we are looking at, if you look at the specifics of industrial activity where employment can grow, first issue that we are concerned with in terms of policy is to address easy finance for MSMEs, which is with a special focus on cash flow issues, because we realize that the cash flow issues are major and they need to be addressed. The second is reduce the burden of compliance, as I had mentioned the last time to you. The state government had brought, which is a pioneering act called the MSME Facilitation Act, in which for the first 3 years from the date of registration, they did not require any kind of approval or NOC or any certification from any government department under any of the state laws, which means you can register on the portal and start business, and you don't have to go to any government department, etc. To the extent that even the urban laws have been modified, whereas if you have a kind of a knowledge in the MSME where you hire less than 12 people, you don't have to change. You can do it from your home, you can do it from your garage. You don't have to convert that to commercial plot, or you don't have to get a commercial connection for your electricity in your domestic place, etc. So we have gone down to a minor detail onto how these things can impact. So you can start your business, and you can establish, you can stabilize it before you start going for compliance approvals, etc., which is a 3 years that has been given. An automatic certificate is issued without any human intervention, which is almost instant. The moment your registration is completed, a registration certificate is issued, and this registration certificate is deemed as all NOCs given by the government is accepted for electricity connection, it is accepted for financing, it is accepted for land allotment, land conversion, everything that you require to start your business. This certificate opens the door for you. I think this has been one of the most unique laws. Unfortunately, it is not very well publicized. I think that's our mistake that we have not been able to do so. But we have close to 8 to 10,000 registrations already on that portal. And even if 20% of these run successfully, we have a fairly good number in the last 3 years, which is close to 2,000, 2,500, which we believe would already have come on stream. So this has been one major change that has been done. But now what we are doing at this point of time, which I will share with you later about the bigger structural reforms that we are looking at, is how to reduce compliances themselves, the number of compliances themselves under the state laws, which means that if at the moment we have 65 different compliances required, we need to bring this down to not more than 15 to 20 compliances, because I believe many of these are now obsolete. They may not be necessary. And many of these can move to self-certification or a third-party certification instead of government certification. So we are working on that. And hopefully that would then further reduce, even after 3 years, once you have to go back for compliances, the number should be reduced. One of the discussions that is going on in the government, I don't know what the decision will be, is to extend this period of 3 years to 5 years. In this period, because of the pandemic, many of the MSMEs were not able to really work their way out of the initial pre-establishment requirements, and therefore we might increase the number of years to 5 years for this particular period as an exception. But this decision will be taken at the appropriate level at some point of time. There is also a single window which has been established by the state government, which is in the Bureau of Investment Promotion. This single window is for larger units because they still need larger units. 90% of compliances are under central laws, but the enforcement of compliance is done by the state government, and therefore we have set up a single window, real single window system where all the relevant officers of all the concerned departments sit under one roof and provide all the clearances and approvals that are required. I would certainly want a feedback from all of you. If some of you can go and try it out and tell us where there is a problem, we would like to make it much better. And this can only happen if we can hear from you. The third area that the government is now engaged with is to look at market linkages for the MSMEs, which includes exports, and see where there are weak links, where there are bottlenecks, and then try and remove these. Fourth is to provide impetus to innovation. We have a very good startup policy, which I would urge you to have a look at. Also, to promote diversification in MSMEs, improve their marketing skills, quality, and also price competitiveness, which are all very important for success in the marketplace. And the fifth is to improve employability of the labor from Rajasthan by revamping the skill development mission that we already have. And we hope that in the revamped skill development mission, there would be much greater participation of the private sector. So these are specific to the industrial areas, or manufacturing sectors. But we are also looking, which is under the council, the Chief Minister's Economic Transformation Council, where we are looking at some 9 very important areas of structural reforms or structural transformation of the Rajasthan's economy. And the first one is managing the urban informal sector. With the acceleration in urbanization, migration of labor from rural to the urban areas has increased exponentially. We did witness, if you remember, the horror of mass exodus of migrant labor from the cities during the pandemic lockdown. Most of these get absorbed in the informal sector, which is around 90% of employment, and which includes construction, thelewalas, beldars, rickshawalas, roadside chai shops, etc. But they are all in conflict with our town planning laws. So if whereas 90% of the people are employed in the informal sector, our town planning does not recognize any spaces for informal sector, and they are all encroaching within inverted commas on roads, on pavements, etc., and they're routinely removed, and it also increases a lot of corruption at the ground level. So we are looking at a major structural change in the manner in which urban development takes place, in terms of town planning takes place, and how to improve what we would say the conditions to make them decent conditions, which includes living conditions, which includes social security, safety net for the informal sector, so that the number of persons who are employed in it are able to get better and more decent life while working in that sector. The second area is sustainable agriculture. Since the Green Revolution, agriculture has been characterized by three factors: use of hybrid or GM seeds, resulting in intensive use of water, which results in depletion of groundwater, and increasing use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which contaminates the food chain as well as groundwater, and increasing need for debt finance to procure inputs from the market. We have seen, and a lot of us have criticized, the waiving of farm loans, but what we don't realize is that the farmers are as have no bankruptcy laws, which the industry now has, and for restructuring loans or waiving off loans or waiving off penalties, which we believe is right. They don't have this facility, and they are also indebted because of the manner in which we have our agriculture policies have promoted the use of capital intensive agriculture inputs. So what we are looking at is the possibility of increasing what is known as zero budget natural farming, which is now being practiced in many places, including Rajasthan in small areas, but in Andhra Pradesh, it has been done in a very big way. And this would lead to much greater sustainability, including financial sustainability for the farmers, and would reduce the burden on the economy in terms of indebtedness or in terms of the requirement for loan waivers, etc. The third area that we're looking at is integrated agro-business infrastructure in the rural areas, starting with making rural roads more productive in terms of economic returns, which means that we need to now begin to look at roads not simply for people to travel on, but as an economic asset which improves productivity of the agriculture or the rural areas. There is also need for a comprehensive plan for integrated logistics and support infrastructure, which includes modern warehousing and food storage facilities, cold chains, etc., and linking it with the process of financialization of commodities market and development of commodities futures markets in Rajasthan. So this is another structural reform that we are looking at, and hopefully we would like to pursue. Fourth is, as Ajay had also mentioned, the hospitality, the area of hospitality, which is now a major economic activity in Rajasthan. But we have never done quantification of the contribution of intangible cultural assets to the economy, because much of our hospitality is predicated on the cultural, intangible cultural assets, folk artists, folk singers, handicraft persons, the camel safaris, the elephant safaris, etc. but we have not ever done a quantification, and therefore very little policy effort has gone into protecting and promoting these. There are n number of examples where, for instance, the folk artists are now dying because of the lack of patronage, which they are not getting. And for the purposes, from the policy perspective, these are seen as more of cultural activities, and therefore not requiring any kind of policy intervention to treating them as an economic asset. So this is something that we want to move towards, to make it a little more a sustainable activity rather than leaving it to the vagaries of consumption by the tourists as and when they want to do so. Fifth, of course, is education and the new paradigm. I think without looking at it, we cannot look at the benefits that we can derive from a demographic dividend. Uh, Pandemic has accelerated digitization of education, and already the effects of this is visible in the form of a growing divide between children from economically weaker sections of the society, largely going to government schools, and those from affluent sections who are privileged to go to private schools. For online classes, the use of Google Hangout, Zoom, need for smart devices and stable, good quality internet connection, well-trained and digitally adapt teachers and parents is an imperative to access education now. As a result, those in rural areas are going to less advantaged schools are getting deprived of education. And therefore, this has another consequence, which is in new digitally driven world, job opportunities or even business opportunities would be in this area, and this would leave the less privileged at a disadvantage in the employment market. Therefore, there is a need to rethink the model of education government should pursue to bridge this disadvantage to the extent it can. And therefore, we are looking with this perspective on the complete structural change in the delivery of public education, which is through government schools or municipal schools in the state. This is also true for medical services. Ajay, you tell me if I'm overrunning the time. I'll quickly kind of shorten it. For Rajasthan, providing quality medical education over a vast and often sparsely populated geographical area is a major challenge. We saw this during pandemic. And while the medical services have been ramped up in considerably during this pandemic and have rendered yeoman service, there is now a need for moving towards telemedicine and remote consultation, and rethink the way in which public health services are made available to the people. While in Delhi, mohalla clinics, because it's completely a metropolitan and a city state, was easier. For a large state like Rajasthan, we'll have to find more innovative ways, and this is another area which we are engaged with at the moment. I already spoke about doing business, and as I had mentioned to you earlier, we want to now bring down the compliance burden considerably in the state. The eighth area of our concern is increasing public-private partnership in infrastructure. And for this, we are looking at, Rajasthan has done some very pioneering work in this area, including setting up of PDCOR, which was a company to do financial modeling for PPPs and so on for the state projects. But we need to now have, in the changed circumstances, begin to look at it in a new way, especially from the perspective of sourcing finances, because the states now, with their fiscal deficit issues, do not have headroom to deploy more funds. Then the state should now be able to access through new instruments and through new instrumentalities the funds from the capital markets for infrastructure development. And this area is something that we are very deeply engaged with. And finally, the fiscal management of the state. So at the end of the day, any structural reform that we do cannot happen unless the fiscal management of the state is improved. So we are looking at the areas in which we can begin to improve our fiscal health by reducing the state's debt, by increasing the revenues for the state, by rationalizing expenditure. And so this would be the ninth area of our activity. I will stop here, and then if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you.
Dr. Mayaram, thank you so much. As always, very, very well put together. And these 9 points are really indeed very apt for us to discuss. If it is okay with you, can we extend the dialogue by 15 minutes instead of 12:30? If we can close at 12:45, because we do have a lot of interest. Is that fine, Dr. Mayaram?
Yeah, that's fine with me. Thank you.
Okay. So over to you, Vish. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ajay, and good morning, Dr. Mayaram. Thank you very much for giving us a very, very comprehensive view of where Rajasthan is today and where you're moving. I have, I think, three expert panelists here representing different industry sectors. And I will actually request them to first go, given that they have enough time to put their questions or give their thoughts here. And if it is okay, I would follow first. We could ask Tanmay, followed by Neeta, and then Manu. Is that okay with you, Manu? If that's this thing which we go with, yeah. Thank you very much.
That's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Manu.
Thank you, thank you, Vish. This is Tanmay Chakravarti, sir. Pleasure meeting you again. We've had some wonderful interactions when you were in Delhi. 2 points, I think you've comprehensively covered the future roadmap and some of the priorities that Government of Rajasthan is taking now. And as you said, through the introspective approach, looking at the ground realities, the fast dynamically changing situation due to the pandemic, and those were very well taken. We have made note of some of the thrust areas. 2 points I would like to seek your clarification or your response. One is the hospitality industry. Of course, we are very well and very deeply invested in the state. We run some of the marquee locations as a part of our group, the Taj hotels. But what are your thoughts on affordable tourism and the fact that is there any kind of an incentive structure to fast forward affordable tourism infrastructure in the various towns and cities of Rajasthan? You know that my question is driven from the fact that we run Ginger, and we would be very keen to actually set up Ginger in every single city of tourist interest in Rajasthan. And I think every single city of Rajasthan is of touristic interest. So that's one clarification I would like to seek from you. Is there any fast tracking incentivization for running, setting up or partnering for infrastructure for affordable tourism? The second point, sir, is the sun-laden state. What are some of your thoughts on further? There's a tremendous setup of solar energy, renewable energy in your state. But are you thinking of accelerating based on lessons learned from the different waves of engagement with solar farms? Is there any special focus on fast tracking, because you really have the ability to offer this source of solar energy, which is the sun, which is available in abundance in Rajasthan? And the last point that I have is the policies of continuity of engagement between the two governments. We in the industry have seen Rajasthan transition from a certain government to the current regime. And we have some of us have been actually caught in the trap, or what should I say, the schism between the two governments in terms of the continuity of policy, especially in terms of projects. And I specifically bring your attention to the Dravyavati program, which has transformed the city of Jaipur from a river rejuvenation perspective. We are suffering from change of thinking from a certain direction in which the implementation took place to a completely volte-face in terms of the continuity in the new regime. So these are my three asks of you, if you can clarify. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mayaram. Would you want me to ask all the three panelists, or would you like to respond to each one of them separately?
Whatever you suggest.
Could we first have the three of them maybe put their questions, if that's okay with you? And then
Sure. Absolutely.
Thank you. Over to you, Neeta.
नमस्कार मायाराम जी, कहा सुना माफ पर कुछ बातें कहनी बहुत जरूरी है. Number one, sir, you talked about the fiscal health of the state. And as you would be aware that the Alcobev contributes to about 42% of the state's own revenue, if I was to exclude the SGST. A sector that actually, also offers direct employment to over 3,000 people, participates in the manufacturing with over 10 units in the state, and has a symbiotic and an economic relationship with all sectors, whether it's tourism, sir, which you've been leading the department for 2 years in the past, whether it's agriculture, whether it's indirect, direct labor, board, paper, agri. So here's the challenge that we are facing, sir. In addition to this year, in fact, we have yet not come out of the pandemic. The challenge that the industry is facing is, how do we sustain our operations in the state as well? Because the inflation here is a runaway inflation, be it ENA at 26%, be it boards at 32%, be it our Gwala caps, every input, direct input material has shot up. If I add the state inflation, sir, then look, the diesel has been a runaway, electricity has been runaway. So the fact is that today, with a supplier share, which has reduced to 14% of the total income generated by the state, it's becoming a serious challenge to be able to address and talk and work on sustainability of the operations. So एक तो ये सवाल है कि important होते हुए भी, integrated होते हुए भी, economic और social impact करते हुए भी, आज हमारी स्थिति ये है कि हम अब survival की बात कर रहे हैं at 16%. So that was one, sir. Second is, sir, you've been a part of the tourism industry, you've led it. फिर ये एक rule जो है, जो 20 rooms and above, Tanmay talked about Ginger and such affordable, room capacity coming up. If room capacities below 20 rooms are not allowed to serve, IMFL are not allowed to serve our brands and our products, then how will the industry grow? How will the rooms get occupied? How will tourism be growing in the state, sir? So that was the second point. The third point, sir, is आपसे सवाल ये था कि ठीक है, अगर inflation adjustment, there needs to be an economic model, sir, where the supplier prices have an inflation adjustment, transparent and known to everybody, equitable for all sectors of the Alcobev industry. But ऐसा हो नहीं रहा, sir. So that was the other thing. Interim में, if the industry can get some working relief, sir. Because with a 12% volume decline, not yet recovered from the pandemic, how do we address some relief in the working capital to say the suppliers are paying the excise duty upfront? Can there be some relief? Can there be a less of burden to say, can this be brought down to 30% at this stage so that there is some interim relief, sir? So these were some of the key points I wanted to highlight. And that's why I said, I'm glad for this open forum and discussion with you, sir. So we have some indication for the industry that, and the members for ISWAI, that we can go back and say that, look, kahin to sunwai hui hai, kahin to baat sunne mein aayi hai, your importance to the state economy has been taken into account, and that there will be considerations, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Neeta.
Thank you.
Thank you. Manu? Please.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Manu from Jubilant Industries, and we have a primary interest in Rajasthan. We have a large manufacturing unit for making single superphosphate fertilizers, and we restarted this plant last year. and we want to even expand further because we think this is a strategic location for us to cover most of northern markets and of course Rajasthan as well. And we are quite strong as a brand in this category of fertilizers in the northern region. Just to highlight a few things which I think are important for the sustainable growth of the SSP industry in Rajasthan, where we are also a formidable player and so are other people as well. I think one of the core things which is right now we are facing as an industry is the adequate supply of rock phosphate, where RSMML is the sole supplier of rock phosphate in India and has gone through a lot of turmoil in terms of very low production. So if the government could look into this, this will really help us because it's also brings down the level of imports for the country. Right now, most of the rock phosphate is being imported, and with the RSMML production coming down, is putting a lot more pressure on the imports for the country. That's one point. The second point I wanted to highlight was that we as a unit are not in the industrial area of Rajasthan. We are near Chittorgarh, a place called Kapasan. And while it's important to run a unit there in tandem with what other industries would run, but we are not having a level playing field in terms of basic infrastructure. We have regular power shortages, a water shortage, and even connectivity of rail, etc., is quite weak in the area where we are. So if you want to develop industry in the other areas apart from industrial zones, then I think it's important for the government to look at some of these parameters, which will help us in a significant way. And finally, I wanted to also talk about that since we are not really in the industrial zone, we are sort of in the farming community area where we work, where there are a lot of local villagers who are attached to our plant. I think if there is not a proper ecosystem which is laid down by the government, there is likelihood of lack of appreciation both from the employer and also from the local communities. So what that leads to is some sort of mistrust sometimes. I think if the government could lay down some fundamental principles along with the local communities and the employing units, which are in these non-industrial areas, I think that will really help in bringing a lot more cohesive working for both plants and the local communities. I think these three suggestions, I feel, will go a long way in helping people like us to deliver better productivity, better business, and further expand our interests in Rajasthan.
Thank you,
So
Manu.
that's it for me right now, sir.
Thank you, Manu. Dr. Mayaram, you have a plate full of questions there. I hope, whatever, if you could just please respond to them and then we could take it from there.
So the one big problem is that I wouldn't have ready information on specifics of sectors or more specifically about individual industries, because I don't deal with industry as a subject in the government. So I don't have that information with me. I'm sorry, I would not be able to say much to it. What I can say is that I'll be very happy if you can send to me your suggestions, which then I can take up at the appropriate level to see if we can find a solution to them. For instance, in terms of affordable tourism, see, in tourism, there is one interesting thing, which is that what we need to do is to remove barriers. There is not very much that the government can do in terms of individual activity. Like if you for setting up of ginger hotels, if you find there are barriers, then certainly government should step in and remove them. But for ginger hotel, for instance, government cannot give free land, or how the political economy functions. You cannot do anything specific for a particular industry. And then affordability has to be also defined in a way in policy. I understand what affordability means, but in policy it needs to be defined in a way that it does not attract adverse attention to say you are allowing it is more like a crony capitalism, something which is nowadays becoming a major issue as far as policy making is concerned in the country. I mean, I'm not talking about Rajasthan, but in the entire country. So we need to have specifics, if you send to me, about affordable uh, tourism. Like, for instance, there is a great proliferation of OYO hotels and Airbnbs, etc., in the state. Recently, somebody whose country's vice president for OYO had met me, and they didn't seem to have much of a problem as far as the state is concerned. I actually told them the problem is in terms of quality check, because with branding as OYO hotel, people have started expecting a lot of complaint about what kind of services they are getting or what kind of room infrastructure they have. So I'd be happy to hear from you if you think there are barriers to it that we need to remove as policy. They can be removed. Certainly, I'd like to look at them, because tourism is one thing which gives Rajasthan a huge amount of revenues also, and we would like to promote that. Now, as far as the issue about solar farms is concerned, actually there is a national program for solar development. So, see, growth in solar power is not simply a function of investment. It has a huge you know the other part is also equally important. For instance, evacuation, the grid strengthening you need to have. So you cannot speed anything up beyond the overall development of that ecosystem, which means that you need to have a grid connectivity. Then you need to also have strengthening of power exchanges, so that you can sell a lot of power there. We need to now introduce a lot of batteries to stabilize the solar power when it is used in the grid. So there is a whole big thing there. And a lot of effort is going on at the all India level, and the state is very much part of that effort, because Rajasthan obviously is one of the major players as far as solar is concerned. But that is all that I can say now to you, that it cannot be speeded up just because state government provides certain incentives. This requires a much bigger discussion as to how we would speed it up also. You must also remember there is a energy transition roadmap, because you cannot completely close down the thermal power plants tomorrow. There is a sunk capital investment in those close to 5 to 6 lakh crores. So you can't say that we will just step up solar and renewable energy to a level where by 2030 all thermal plants will be shut down. So it's a different level of discussion which we can do at some other point of time. As far as policy continuity between governments is concerned, I would say the problem is more fundamental than just policy continuity. The problem is consensus. So before 1991, there was a different type of consensus where we had a lot of licensing. The government had decided where, but everyone was part of that consensus, which meant that even if the governments changed, and the governments did start changing from 1969 onwards. I mean, Congress governments went out in UP, for instance, other places, but there was a consensus on how economy will be dealt with, whether right or wrong, good or bad. I'm not getting into that. I'm not getting into the merit of it, but there was a consensus. So when the governments changed, economic policies remained more or less the same. Then this consensus was broken in 1991, but a new national consensus also came up very quickly after 1991, where the economic reforms that had come in were broadly accepted, and then they moved on it. Whether it was, and huge number of governments changed in between. If you remember, there was Mr. Gowda's government and Mr. Gujaral's government, and then Mr. Bajpayee's government, and then of course UPA came in, and they were all on the same consensus that reforms are required. You strengthen reform, but at the same time you also strengthen the other part, which is the equity issue. so that inequality needs to be addressed, poverty needs to be addressed, but you also open up. So this consensus was holding. Unfortunately, from 2014 onwards, the 1991 consensus has broken down. But for instance, now there is this huge the China model of creating national champions. So you have one or two industries which need to be made into huge, international sized companies, but then it becomes a barrier for new entrants into this into the economic activity. And therefore, if you see today, the political discourse is fragmented and there is no consensus in it. So unless you have a consensus on how the economy should grow, what should be done on economy, demonetization, for instance, is completely, even today, there's no consensus on whether it was good or bad. You take GST implementation, there is no consensus on it. So when you talk about policy continuity, I think it's a tall order in a fractious and fragmented polity where there is no economic consensus, and therefore all of us will need to move towards an economic consensus, even if politics is different. Politics always has to be different. Parties are differently structured. But on foreign policy, on economy, some of these areas, there was a kind of a consensus. I think there is a need for going to a new consensus where all parties broadly accept the path, the trajectory of economic growth. Then what you are saying would possibly come back again. Now, see, on alcohol and beverages, it's, I understand what you're saying, but the problem is that our society is schizophrenic in more ways than one. We publicly speak against corruption. Privately, we like corruption because it gets things done. We don't need to comply all the time. So we do that. We decry caste, but when we have to marry our children, we go around looking for children, girls or boys from the same caste. So we are a kind of a schizophrenic society, and this is true of also our attitude towards alcohol. So in public policy, it becomes very difficult for anybody to espouse the cause of alcohol. It is looked at always by any party, whichever it may be, as a necessary evil. And that's why reforming the policies or providing any kind of relief to this becomes a bit of a challenge. Nobody is willing to accept. And I fully endorse what you're saying, that alcohol and beverages have been very powerful contributors to the fisc in the state or in the country. But no government is willing to catch the bull by the horns and say this is important for the economy.
Right. So my point, sorry to interrupt, sir, but my point was really with respect to the economic policy and not public policy, to say that at least
economic policy,
get the inflation model. You cannot have one segment really cornered to the back and still having a 42% share of the.
Look at cigarettes. Look at the excise policy on cigarettes. Delhi, if you go around in so many scooter rickshaws, you see written behind the scooter rickshaw saying, "I am a tobacco farmer, I am starving." Because the excise duty on cigarettes and smugglers are bringing in cigarettes. This is a problem. Now, what about tobacco? The same thing is the problem with the tobacco policy. You have if the duties, excise duties on cigarettes are horrendously high, but nobody is willing to say that this provides so many farmers with livelihood. There are so many people employed in making BD and making. So this is a problem. So I'm not conflicting with what you're saying. I'm not contradicting you. All I'm explaining to you is the problem is that we are a schizophrenic society. All of us are like that. Large number of us will drink, but not, hide it and not drink in front of everybody else, only with our friends. In public, we will say drinking is a very bad habit. At home, we'll get drunk. I mean, this is something that we are, I mean, this is how we are. So I don't see any public policy coming in terms of inflation indexing of alcohol, etc. I don't see that happening. But if there are any specific issues which can be looked at without making a big wave or
Yeah.
without losing a lot of revenues, etc., please do send to me. I will see what we can do.
I'll do that, sir, because we are essentially saying cost of input has gone up, and can that be adjusted for without affecting, the contribution or the volume or the public schizophrenic stance that we have?
That would happen. You will have to talk of specifics. Nobody is going to index it to inflation. That I can assure you today. Which is not no input or no supply is indexed to inflation at the moment in any case. So alcohol can't be made an exception of. But if there are specific issues, like you've said about allowing bars in hotels with less than 20 rooms, one big problem with that is, how do you control the manner in which these so if somebody has one room and then he just makes one room, declares it as a hotel, and then starts a bar out there. So there is a bit of an issue, and there is also a public resentment against it. See, what happens is, smaller hotels are mostly in residential areas, and therefore people, who goes to these bars? Obviously, the people who go to these small bars are not the guys who you would want around your homes if you have families living around, etc. So there is a social angle to it. The number of rooms actually is not in terms of the arithmetical 20. It has something to do with their geographical location of these. If you have a hotel which is bigger, it has a own premises, it becomes a little more private. So these are some issues, but if these kind of issues are there, we can certainly start looking at them and see how they.
Right, sir. We'll come back with specifics. Also, the working capital one, which I think is a fair ask, given that the high rate of taxation, there needs to be some relief at the working capital in terms of an upfront payment of 100% excise duty. That also in the interim can give some relief.
We can have a look at that. So
yes,
just send that.
I will. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. With regard to the SSP industry that you mentioned, I do understand what you're saying. And I will certainly bring this to the notice of the government about the production of RSMML, whatever is happening there. If there are issues, as you said, about ecosystem in Chittorgarh, etc., please do send to me. We will also try and look at it. One big problem about standalone industries and infrastructure is that government just doesn't have the wherewithal to create special infrastructure for industries which are in standalone areas. That's why it is always much better to go into an industrial area, because the economies of scale allow better infrastructure to be developed there and so on. But in rural areas, it becomes a challenge, because if government was to start investing in every industry which is standalone, I don't think it will have money left for anything else to do, because in like cement factories, they're on pit heads of limestone mines. There's so many of them all over the place. I mean, how does government create a better rail linkage with them, or better entire grid for them? It becomes a bit of a challenge. So I think that is an area where I don't know we can find a solution. But the other things that you have mentioned, I'm very sure that we would be able to look at some of the and find some solution to that.
So there are a couple of other small issues. I didn't want to bring it up in the
just write to me
now. Can I write to you separately? And so they're important for us.
Please do that. Please do.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mayaram, for answering all of the questions so patiently and taking time to talk about issues. Though you started off by saying that you wouldn't have the full answers to them, I think you've answered all of them in terms of each of the questions. And as Tanmay, Neeta, or Manu have said, if they could come back to you with more specific details, And then maybe you could even refer them to your colleagues who you think would be the right person to take a look at it, and we could take it from there. So we take it that the panelists could then come back to you.
Yes.
I do know that we are just if I could just take one question from the person who's just asked a question on saying the new industries are not allowed to draw groundwater and other resources, and therefore he wants to again raise this with RICO and with others. I suppose should he be writing to RICO directly, or do you think there is some way by which any other person he should go to for issues like this in the MSME sector? Do you think he should be going to?
No, groundwater is again a complex issue. I mean, it's not one solution for the entire state. There are areas which are declared dark areas or dark zones where the recharge is less than the excavation of water. So people now they're getting into water mining. The quality of water is deteriorating. The water level is going down. So there in Rajasthan is water deficit. In fact, it's important, therefore, for anybody who's doing industry to try and get into water conservation as well as water collection, rainwater collection in a way that it can provide some relief to the groundwater depletion that is happening. So I don't think there is any specific answer I can give, because it would depend on which area you are in. But if you are in an industrial area, obviously the water requirement is met by RICO, and industries are not allowed to dig for water. If you are outside of the industrial area, then it will depend on which zone you are. If you are in the dark zone, then tube wells will not be permitted.
Sure.
But that's a national policy. I mean, that's not specific to Rajasthan.
Dr. Mayaram, one of the things which has come up to me when hearing all these panelists here and also the questions that are coming up is there are these specific issues. From PAFI, can I just suggest, is it possible for us to have a kind of, a panel or something like that with whom we could have either a discussion with, either come there and have a face-to-face for the PAFI members to kind of raise some of these questions and issues? And you talked about a single window clearance for issues, but if you could have a single window for, for questions to be raised and for answers to be given, would that be a possibility? I mean, is that something we could look at from a PAFI perspective?
No, I mean, you can certainly meet people. Industry secretary would be the one who would generally deal with this. I mean, it's possible to do that. But I have found the manner in which it can be most effective is one, individual cases cannot be discussed in meetings because those have to be dealt with individually. So if we kind of 10 people go and then raise issues of each of their industries, I don't think the industry secretary would also have the competence to answer those questions. They are very specific. But if there is an industry related issue, it's much better to first write the issues very clearly, enunciate the issue, say what the problem is, suggest what you think could be a response. And then possibly ask for a meeting, then a discussion becomes more meaningful. But otherwise, the person will sit there, he will say, like I've told you just now, write to me, we will see. I mean, this is the answer that you will get if you went to talk to somebody with a list of your problems. So if you write initially to them saying, these are our issues, these are what we believe can be the solutions, and we would like to meet you, then he will also know who are the people involved in it. If it is, for instance, industry secretary has to deal with the alcohol industry, he may invite the excise commissioner there because he may not be directly able to give that. So I think it becomes more meaningful if you give that kind of a list of your grievances.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Mayaram. Thanks for your time. So, I mean, all the panelists here would certainly be writing to you based on what we could then maybe direct them to whoever you think is right.
Yes. Yes.
And thank you for your time. Thank you for also allowing us an additional 15 minutes to answer some of your questions.
So I'm going to
thank you.
Thank you all the panelists. I'm going to request my colleague Vinita to propose a formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Vinita.
Thank you so much, Sir Dr. Arvind Mayaram. This is really amazing. And what I think we have a huge takeaway again from your talk is that the pleasure of doing business does not stop here. We're building these little cornerstones and steps that will help us understand the challenges that you also face. And from our perspective, you have seen extreme interest of everyone to invest in the state. So all that we are looking at is now how do we get some of these roadblocks out of the way and get policies done in such a way that PPP becomes a reality, and Rajasthan actually takes the lead and tells the world that here we have the best industries coming and investing despite the challenges. So thank you to all the panelists, and thank you once again for taking time off from your busy schedule, and wish you great health. And thank you, Ajay. And we look forward to at least following up on what Vishay said on a paper from industry that we can submit to your office, Mr. Mayaram, and then we can take from there. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I see we do have some participants' questions which were not answered. So wish we could put together all of them together, and if we'll be, consolidate the points made by the three discussants and these questions, and we can then send it to Dr. Mayaram for his perusal. Dr. Mayaram, I can't thank you enough. This is a happy way for us to end the PAFI Dialogue 2021. We hope to see you next year again, and maybe we could have a physical meeting next year. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.